Jonathan Carter stepped out of his sleek, black SUV into the crisp night air. The street was alive with flickering neon signs and the faint hum of traffic. He pulled his hoodie up, shoving his hands into the pockets of his worn-out jeans. Tonight, he wasn't a billionaire CEO, the head of one of the nation's most successful retail chains. Tonight, he was just another customer. For months, rumors had reached him, whispers of discrimination, subtle complaints from customers, even anonymous letters. He had dismissed them at first. His company prided itself on diversity and inclusivity. But the murmurs grew louder, too loud to ignore. So here he was, walking into one of his own stores, one of the flagship locations. No less, dressed in ordinary clothes, hoping to see the truth for himself. His heart pounded, not from fear but from anticipation. He had built his empire by confronting problems head-on. And tonight would be no different. A small bell chimed as he pushed the glass door open. The store was well lit, filled with soft background music and the faint scent of new merchandise. Employees stood behind the counter, laughing among themselves. Everything seemed normal. Until he noticed it. A young black man stood by the shoe section, holding a pair of sneakers hesitantly, as if unsure whether he should approach the counter. Across the store, a well-dressed white woman barely made it 3 steps before an employee rushed to assist her. Jonathan exhaled slowly, irritation rising in his chest. Determined to test the waters, he picked up a high-end leather jacket and walked toward the register. A tall, brown-haired employee barely looked at him before giving a tight-lipped smile. "Can I help you?" the employee asked, his tone flat. "Yeah," Jonathan said evenly. "Do you have this in a smaller size?" The employee barely glanced at the jacket before shaking his head. "Whatever's on the rack is what we have." "Could you check in the back?" The employee sighed. "If it's not out here, we don't have it." Jonathan gestured toward a white customer a few feet away, who was admiring a pair of expensive shoes. "What about him? If he asked, would you check?" The employee's lips pressed into a thin line. "Look, sir, if you're not buying anything." Before he could finish, another voice interrupted. "Hey, are you gonna help me or what?" Jonathan turned. It was the young black man from earlier, standing near the counter, frustration evident in his voice. The employee barely looked at him. "We're out of that size." "But I haven't even told you what size I need." Silence. Jonathan clenched his jaw. He had seen enough. Before he could speak, another employee smirked. "Why don't you guys shop somewhere else? You know, where you'd fit in better." The words hit like a punch. Jonathan's blood ran cold. He wasn't easily shaken, he had built his empire by standing tall against adversity, but hearing those words, spoken so casually, so unapologetically, struck something deep inside him. The young black man beside him inhaled sharply, his hands tightening around the showbox. "Excuse me?" The first employee shrugged. "No offense. Just saying, some places cater to different kinds of people." Jonathan's fingers curled into fists. He could walk out. He could leave, knowing he had the power to bring down consequences tomorrow. But that wasn't enough. No. He needed them to see him, to know who he was. With deliberate slowness, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. The call was answered on the first ring. "This is Carter," he said, voice cold as steel. "I need every store manager and regional executive at this location first thing tomorrow morning." The employees froze. Jonathan locked eyes with the smirking employee. "Because when I walk through those doors again, it won't be as a customer. It'll be as the CEO." Silence fell over the store. For the first time that night, Jonathan saw something flicker in the employees' faces, not amusement, not condescension, fear. And he would make damn sure they had good reason to feel it. The next morning, The atmosphere inside the store was entirely different. Jonathan Carter arrived at precisely 8 a.m. No disguise. No hoodie. This time, he walked in with the full weight of his authority. His tailored suit, polished shoes, and the presence of his senior executives flanking him made it impossible for anyone to mistake him for just another customer. The employees from the night before stood stiffly near the register, their expressions ranging from nervous to outright terrified. The smirking employee, the one who had so casually suggested that black customers shop elsewhere, looked pale. The brown-haired employee who had refused to check inventory stared at the floor. Jonathan let the silence stretch. He wanted them to feel the weight of this moment. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a restrained fury simmering beneath the surface. Someone explained to me what happened last night. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Jonathan nodded slowly. Very well. He turned to his assistant, who was holding a tablet. Show them. A video played on the screen. Footage from the store's security cameras. It showed everything: his arrival, the ignored customers, the dismissive attitudes, the outright racist comments. The audio was crystal clear. Every employee who had spoken out of turn, who had made assumptions, who had refused service, was now watching their actions play back in real time. By the time the video ended, there were no excuses left to make. Jonathan let the weight of their shame settle in. Then he spoke again. Tell me, he said, his voice quieter now, but no less commanding. Do you think this is acceptable? The room was silent. Answer me. The blonde-haired woman from the register finally broke. No, sir. Jonathan stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across each employee. Yet it happened. And not just once. Not just last night. This isn't an isolated incident. This is a pattern. A culture. And I will not tolerate it in my company. He turned his attention to the worst offenders, the ones who had openly mocked customers. You're fired. The words were final. No negotiation. No second chances. The smirking employee opened his mouth as if to argue, but one sharp look from Jonathan silenced him. The brown-haired employee swallowed hard and nodded, his face white as a sheet. Jonathan exhaled slowly, turning to the remaining staff. As for the rest of you, if you believe that what happened last night is just how things are, then leave now. But if you want to be part of something better, if you want to change, then stay. Because things will change. No one moved. Good. He turned to his executives. Effective immediately. Every single employee in this company will undergo diversity and inclusion training. Store policies will be re-evaluated. And from now on, mystery shoppers will regularly test our customer service. Any form of discrimination, subtle or blatant, will be met with termination. Jonathan's gaze lingered on the remaining staff. This company was built on the idea that everyone deserves respect. That everyone deserves a chance. And if that's not something you can uphold, then you don't belong here. Silence. Then, one by one, employees nodded. Some looked ashamed, others determined. But the message was clear. As Jonathan turned to leave, he caught sight of the young black customer from last night, standing just outside the store, watching. Their eyes met. Jonathan gave him a small nod. A silent promise, this will never happen again. And with that, he walked away, knowing that change had begun. Jonathan Carter didn't leave the matter at just firing employees and implementing new policies. He knew that true change required more than a few disciplinary actions, it required rebuilding the company culture from the ground up. By noon, a company-wide memo had been sent to every store, every regional manager, and every executive in the corporation. The message was clear: racism, discrimination, and bias, whether conscious or unconscious, had no place in this company. That afternoon, Jonathan sat in a private meeting room at headquarters, facing a panel of store managers and executives. He had called them in not just to address what had happened, but to ensure that every leader in his company understood that change was not optional. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "Tell me," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "How many complaints have we received about discrimination in our stores?" His assistant pulled up the data. A long list of reports, stretching over the past 2 years, appeared on the screen. Jonathan's jaw tightened. 2 years. 2 years of complaints that had been ignored, brushed aside, or dismissed as exaggerations. He turned his sharp gaze toward his senior staff. "Explain." A long silence followed. Then, the regional manager of the store from last night hesitantly spoke. "Sir, we've always trained our staff to treat customers fairly. But sometimes," he hesitated. "Sometimes people make mistakes." Jonathan scoffed. "Mistakes?" His voice was dangerously quiet. He tapped the screen. "These aren't mistakes. They're a pattern. A disease infecting our stores. And the fact that no one has done anything about it until now means it's systemic." Another manager tried to interject. "Sir, we..." Jonathan raised a hand, cutting him off. "No. I don't want excuses. I want solutions." He turned to his assistant. "Starting today, every store will undergo a full audit. Hiring practices will be reviewed. Performance will be monitored. And we're bringing in outside experts to train every single employee on racial bias, inclusivity, and proper customer service." A few murmurs of agreement spread across the room. Some nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Jonathan noticed. If anyone here believes this is unnecessary, you can leave now. But know this, if you stay, you will be held accountable. This company is about to change, and if you can't change with it, you have no place here." No one moved. Jonathan nodded. "Good. Then let's get to work." 1 month later. It didn't take long for the changes to ripple through the company. Employees were required to complete bias training. Store managers were held to higher standards. And Jonathan personally reviewed the feedback from mystery shoppers. The difference was night and day. Customers, especially black customers, began to notice. Some even posted on social media about the transformation. One comment caught Jonathan's eye. It was from the young black man who had been ignored that night. "I walked into the same store a month later, expecting the same treatment. But this time, an employee greeted me immediately. Asked if I needed help. Actually checked for my size. The energy felt different. I don't know what changed, but I can feel it. Maybe, just maybe, this company actually cares." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time since that fateful night, he allowed himself a small smile. Because this time, it wasn't just a business success. It was justice. The sweeping changes Jonathan Carter implemented didn't go unnoticed. While many praised his actions, there were others who weren't so pleased. Within days of the policy shift, anonymous emails flooded corporate inboxes. Some employees grumbled about the new training requirements, calling them unnecessary and the waste of time. A few even quit, claiming that the company had become too political. Then, the media got wind of the story. Headlines exploded across news outlets and social media. Newspaper CEO goes undercover. Exposes racism in his own company. Newspaper the bold stand against discrimination or corporate theater. Newspaper some employees push back against forced diversity training. Jonathan expected backlash. He had been in the business world long enough to know that real change never came without resistance. But he didn't expect what came next. A group of former employees, some of whom had been fired after his visit, filed a lawsuit. Their claim? Unfair termination and workplace discrimination. The irony made Jonathan want to laugh. They had been fired for being racist, and now they were claiming to be victims. His legal team assured him the case wouldn't hold up in court. The evidence against those employees was overwhelming. Still, the lawsuit put pressure on the company, and some shareholders grew nervous. At an emergency board meeting, one of the directors leaned forward, finger steepled. "Jonathan, we all support equality, but we can't afford to alienate certain customers or employees. This is a business, not a crusade." Jonathan's expression remained unreadable. "Are you suggesting we backtrack?" The director hesitated. "I'm suggesting we find a balanced approach." Jonathan's gaze sharpened. "A balanced approach. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. So when employees discriminate against black customers, we look the other way." Silence. Another director cleared his throat. "That's not what we're saying. But some customers are boycotting. Sales have dipped. Investors are uneasy. We just need to be careful." Jonathan let the words hang in the air before responding. "Let me make something clear." His voice was steady, but the undercurrent of authority was unmistakable. "This is not about politics. This is about human decency. If standing against racism makes people uncomfortable, then they are free to shop and invest somewhere else." A few board members exchanged nervous glances. Jonathan leaned forward. "If you want a CEO who prioritizes profits over principles, find someone else." Silence stretched for a long moment. Then, slowly, one director nodded. Then another. And another. Jonathan stood, straightened his suit jacket, and gave them one last look. "We're done here." As he walked out, his phone buzzed with a notification. A new viral post was circulating online. It was a photo of the newly trained store employees helping customers of all races, treating them with respect. And beneath it, a caption that sent a surge of pride through Jonathan's chest. Maybe this is what real change looks like. Months passed, and the storm that had once threatened to shake the company to its core slowly began to settle. The lawsuit? Dismissed. The boycott? Short-lived. And the backlash? Nothing more than a ripple in the wake of something much bigger. Because despite the controversy, despite the doubters, something undeniable had happened. The culture had changed. Jonathan Carter sat in his office, staring out over the city skyline. The reports in front of him told a story that numbers alone couldn't fully capture. Chart with upward trend customer satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. Chart with upward trend diversity hiring had improved across all levels of the company. Chart with upward trend sales, after an initial dip, had not only recovered but surpassed previous records. And then there were the messages. Emails. Letters. Social media posts. People sharing their experiences, how they now felt welcomed in stores where they once felt ignored, how employees who had once turned a blind eye were now standing up for fairness. One message stood out. It was from the young black customer from that fateful night. "Mr. Carter, I don't know if you remember me, but I was the guy in your store the night you went undercover. I almost walked away that night thinking nothing would ever change. I just wanted to say, thank you. Not just for what you did, but for proving that people in power actually can make a difference." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This was why he had done it. Not for PR. Not for damage control. Not for the headlines. But because it was the right thing to do. As he closed his laptop, his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, the board is ready for you." Jonathan nodded, standing up. Another meeting. Another decision. But this time, he walked into the room knowing one thing for certain. He had set a new standard. And there was no turning back. The fight for change never ended. But for now, at least, he had won this battle.